Under the burning skies of the Wild West, where the wind carried dust and whispers of stories untold, there was a town called Silverbend. A place where secrets rode on horseback, and love was rarer than rain. The town's saloon doors creaked like old bones when strangers passed through. Folks didn't trust easily here, not after the gold rush had turned dreamers into thieves and friends into ghosts. But one man didn't come for gold. Elias Kane. He was tall, rough-edged, and silent in the way only a man with a broken past could be. He'd been gone from Silverbend for 7 years, long enough for his name to fade but not his memory, especially not from her heart. Clara Marin. The mayor's daughter. Once wild enough to race horses through the canyon, now tamed by duty and an engagement she never asked for. Her father had promised her hand to Tobias Ward, a wealthy cattle baron twice her age and 5 times as cruel. Elias hadn't known she was promised until the night he rode back into town. He came at sunset, when the sky was a bruised orange, and the air smelled like dust and danger. He stopped his horse outside the saloon, the same one where he'd once played cards, laughed, and nearly fought for her honor. But that was before the war. Before he lost his brother. Before he lost her. Now, stepping inside, Elias scanned the smoky room. Men with guns on their hips turned to look, whispers chasing his name like old ghosts. He ignored them. His eyes found the bar, and then froze. There she was. Clara Marin, in a pale blue dress, standing beside her father, her golden hair pinned in place like a crown. She looked older, sadder, but when she turned, and their eyes met, the world around them seemed to vanish. She inhaled sharply, her lips parting, eyes widening as if she were seeing a ghost. Elias, she whispered under her breath. He tipped his hat slightly, voice low and rough. Evenin', Miss Marin. Her father's eyes narrowed. You've got some nerve showin' your face here, boy. I reckon I do, Elias replied, his tone calm but steady. Didn't come lookin' for trouble. But trouble, in Silverbend, had a way of finding him. That night, the storm came, not from the sky, but from the heart. Clara found him later behind the saloon, under the whispering oak tree they used to meet beneath as kids. The moonlight spilled silver across her face. Why did you come back? She asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her long and hard, his jaw tense. Because I heard they were talking you away. She swallowed hard, clutching her shawl. You shouldn't have come. My father. Tobias, they won't let you walk away this time. Elias took a step closer, his boots crunching the dry earth. Then I won't walk. Not this time. Her eyes glistened. You don't understand. Oh, I do, he said, voice low. Your promise to a man who'll own you, not love you. And I. He stopped himself. The words caught like fire in his throat. She stared at him, waiting. The silence between them was filled with every year they'd lost. Finally, she whispered, and you what, Elias? His gaze softened, the rough edges melting away. And I ain't lettin' that happen. Not while I'm still breathin', Dot. The wind rustled through the oak leaves like applause from ghosts. But behind the beauty of that moment, danger brewed. Someone was watching from the shadows, a man with a black hat and a scar across his jaw. Tobias Ward's right-hand man. The stranger turned away, spitting into the dirt, and muttered, "Boss ain't gonna like this one bit." As dawn broke over Silverbend, Elias packed his saddle and waited by the old riverbed. He knew she'd come, or hoped she would. And when he saw her silhouette through the mist, his heart finally found its rhythm again. But what neither of them knew was that Tobias had already set a trap. 2 riders were following them. And not both would make it out alive. The morning came quiet, heavy with the scent of rain and regret. The town of Silverbend still slept, unaware that before the sun reached its peak, a line would be crossed that could never be drawn back. Elias waited near the riverbed, his horse tied to a weathered post. His hat cast a shadow across his eyes, but his heart beat faster with every rustle in the cottonwoods. Then, she appeared, Clara Marin, wrapped in a grey shawl, her dress dragging in the dew, eyes flicking over her shoulder as if the whole world was chasing her. "You came," he murmured, voice barely more than a whisper. "I had to," she said breathlessly. "They think I'm at the dressmaker's." He gave a small nod, trying not to show how much her presence stirred him. "You sure about this, Clara? Once we ride out, there ain't no comin' back." She hesitated only a second before saying, "I've been livin' in a cage, Elias. You were the only thing that ever felt like freedom." Her words hit him like thunder. He wanted to say something, anything, but instead, he helped her onto the horse, hands steady though his heart wasn't. As they rode across the open plains, the sky shifted from pale blue to a bruised gray. Wind tore through the tall grass, carrying the distant rumble of hooves. "They'll come after us," she said softly. "I know," Elias replied. "But I ain't afraid of men like Tobias Ward. I've faced worse." She turned to him. What could be worse than him? He didn't answer. But deep inside, something stirred, the memory of a battlefield, smoke, and blood. He'd seen worse. Much worse. They stopped by a creek at noon. The air was thick, the water cold. Clara knelt by the bank, dipping her hands into the current. Elias watched her, his heart torn between joy and fear. "Why didn't you send a word?" she asked suddenly, without looking up. "All those years. I thought you'd forgotten you," he finished for her. She nodded. He exhaled, long and slow. "I couldn't forget you if I tried. But I didn't have the right to come back, not after what happened to my brother." Her eyes softened. "Your brother?" He nodded. "Tobias Ward's men ambushed him. Said he stole cattle that weren't his. But they were lying. My brother tried to stand up to Tobias, and paid the price. I left to hunt the truth, and when I found it, it was too late." Her lips parted, shock and sorrow filling her face. "Elias." He looked away, jaw tight. "That's why I came back. Tobias Ward took my blood. I'll be damned if he takes you too." The storm finally broke. Rain came hard and fast, pelting the earth, drenching them both. Elias threw his coat around her shoulders, his hands brushing her arms. "Stay close," he said. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. Lightning cracked across the sky, and for a moment, the whole world glowed. In that flash of light, they looked at each other, not as two souls divided by fate, but as two hearts that had been waiting far too long. He leaned closer, his voice trembling. "You don't belong to him, Clara. Not in this life, not in any other." Her breath caught, her hand brushing his cheek. "Then where do I belong, Elias?" He took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "Right here." The rain fell harder, blurring the world around them. And just when it felt like time itself had stopped, when their hearts had found each other again, the sound of gunfire shattered the moment. Elias pushed Clara to the ground as bullets tore through the trees. Horses screamed in the distance. "They found us," she gasped. He drew his revolver, eyes burning with fury. "Stay down. I'll handle this." Two men rode out of the mist, Ward's men. Elias fired once, twice. One fell from his horse. The other turned tail and rode back toward town, no doubt to tell Tobias that the hunt was still on. When silence returned, Clara clung to him, trembling. "You're hurt," she whispered. He glanced at the blood streaking his sleeve and forced a small grin. "Ain't nothin', that'll kill me. Elias." He cut her off gently. "We keep movin'. There's a cabin up north, near the canyon. No one'll find us there." She hesitated, eyes wet from both rain and fear. "And then what?" He looked at her, really looked, and the truth in his eyes was raw. Then we figure out what a man's supposed to do when the only thing worth living for is the one thing he was never meant to have. As night fell over the plains, Elias and Clara rode toward the canyon. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside them had only just begun. Behind them, the men of Tobias' ward were gathering, guns loaded, hearts full of greed. And far ahead, beyond the shadow of the canyon walls, destiny waited, dark, uncertain, but burning with hope. The canyon rose around them like a cathedral of stone, tall, echoing, and silent except for the drip of rainwater from the ridges above. The path was narrow, winding through brush and jagged rock, but Elias knew it by heart. He'd found it years ago, when he was running from the war, from himself, from everything. Now it would have to keep them both alive. By the time they reached the cabin, the night had swallowed the plains whole. The small wooden structure stood hidden beneath the shadow of a cliff, half swallowed by the earth itself. Clara slid off the horse, boots sinking into the wet soil. "You've been here before," she said softly, noticing the way he moved, how his hands brushed the doorframe, how his eyes softened at the sight of it. "A long time ago," he said. "When I didn't have much left to hold on to." She smiled faintly. "You always did have a way of finding lonely places." He looked at her, the firelight from inside the cabin flickering across his face. "I reckon lonely places find me first." Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of pine and old smoke. Elias struck a match, lighting a lantern that filled the room with a soft golden glow. Dust danced in the air like memories. He built a fire in the small stone hearth, the crackling sound breaking the silence. Clara removed her shawl, steam rising from the damp fabric. Her hair clung to her neck, and for a moment, Elias forgot to breathe. She caught him staring and smiled. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Just, hadn't realized how much I missed the sight of you." Her cheeks flushed a soft pink. "Elias, we shouldn't." "Shouldn't what?" he said, his voice low. "Care. Feel something worth fighting for." She looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her shawl. "You know it's not that simple." He stepped closer, slow and steady, like a man walking toward a fire he knew would burn him. "It's never been simple, Clara. But that doesn't mean it ain't right." The air between them thickened. The firelight danced across her face, casting gold against the softness of her skin. "You think love can undo a promise?" she whispered. He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because it was already written in the way his heart beat. "I think love's the only promise that ever mattered." She turned toward him, tears glinting like tiny stars. "He'll kill you if he finds us." "Let him try." Elias's voice hardened. "He's taken enough from me." Her breath trembled. "And if he takes me back?" His jaw tightened. He reached for her hand, rough, calloused fingers brushing against her soft skin. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life taking you back from him, again and again, till the day I stop breathing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, and time itself seemed to hesitate. Then Clara did something she never thought she would, she stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Elias froze, his breath catching as if he were afraid even the air might break her. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "You're shaken," he murmured. "So are you," she whispered back. He laughed quietly, a sound half sorrow, half relief. "Guess we both been waitin' too long for something that feels this real." The storm outside began again, soft and steady. The rain on the roof became their only witness. And for the first time in years, Elias allowed himself to believe in peace. They stayed hidden for 3 days. Each morning, Elias went out to check the trails, listening for the sound of riders. Each night, they talked, about the past, about the lives they almost lived, about dreams that had been buried long before they ever dared to chase them again. Clara told him about Tobias, How the man had built his empire on fear and gold, how he promised her father land in exchange for her hand. "I was never more than a bargain," she said bitterly. "And when my father passed, Tobias told me it was my duty to honor it." Elias stared into the fire. "He's got no idea what kind of woman he's dealin' with." She smiled faintly. "And what kind is that?" "The kind that can break a man's world just by lookin' at him." She laughed, really laughed, and the sound lit the whole cabin brighter than the fire ever could. But on the fourth morning, everything changed. Elias woke to the sound of a distant echo, a metal sound, sharp and cruel, carried by the wind through the canyon walls. He stood slowly, heart pounding. Clara saw his face pale. "What is it?" He didn't answer at first. He just reached for his revolver. Then he said quietly, "Horses. 3, maybe 4. Comin' fast." Clara's breath hitched. "Tobias?" Elias looked toward the ridge, eyes narrowing. "If it ain't him, it's worse." He turned to her, voice suddenly cold and commanding. "Pack what you can. Now." She obeyed without question, hands trembling as she gathered what little they had. As she did, Elias looked out across the canyon, his mind racing. He'd hoped for more time. He'd hoped for a miracle. But in the Wild West, hope was a fragile thing, and men like Tobias Ward didn't let go of what they thought they owned. By the time the first shot rang out, Elias was already outside, gun drawn, hat low, the dust swirling around his boots. Clara screamed his name from inside the cabin. And Elias, the man she once thought she'd never see again, turned toward the sound of her voice with fire in his eyes and whispered to himself. "Not while I'm still breathing." The morning had no mercy. The canyon, once a safe cradle of stone and silence, now trembled with the thunder of hooves. Dust rose like ghosts, curling through the sharp air. Elias stepped into the open, his revolver steady in his hand, his shadow long and sure against the pale light of dawn. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, dark silhouettes against the sky. Tobias Ward rode at the center, a man carved out of greed and iron. His black coat flapped like a vulture's wings in the wind. The 2 men beside him were hired guns, broad-shouldered, their faces hard and hungry for violence. "Elias Kane," Tobias called down, voice echoing off the rocks. "You got something that belongs to me." Elias's jaw tightened. "I don't recall ever talking anything worth your name." Tobias smiled coldly. "The girl, Kane. You think I'd let some 2-bit drifter steal what I paid for?" Inside the cabin, Clara froze, her hands clutching the edge of the table. She could hear every word, every heartbeat between them. Elias's voice cut through the canyon. "She ain't property, Tobias. She's flesh and soul. And she's with me by her own damn choice." Tobias leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes burning with something darker than jealousy, possession. "You think love's gonna save you, Kane? Men like you die for dreams like that." Elias cocked his revolver. "Maybe. But at least I die for something worth it." Then came the first shot. A deafening crack that split the air. Elias ducked behind a boulder as the bullet struck the ground near his boots, spraying dust. He returned fire, his shot grazing one of Tobias's men. The horses screamed, the wind carried the smell of gunpowder, and the canyon turned into chaos. Inside, Clara's breath came quick and shallow. She wanted to run out, to stop them, but her fear was like stone. Then she saw Elias stumble, one knee hitting the dirt. Her scream tore through the morning. "Elias!" He turned, just long enough to see her standing in the doorway, terrified, shaking, and yet defiant as ever. "Get back inside," he shouted. But Tobias had already seen her. His grin widened like a scar. "So that's your weakness." He raised his gun toward Clara. Elias didn't think, he moved. A single blur of motion, faster than fear itself. His shoulder slammed into Tobias, throwing him from his horse. The gun went off, the sound echoing like thunder through the canyon. For a few seconds, there was nothing but ringing silence. Then Clara ran to him, fell to her knees beside Elias as he breathed hard, his arm bleeding where the bullet had grazed him. "You're hurt," she whispered, pressing her hands to the wound. He smiled faintly, even through the pain. "Ain't the first time. Won't be the last." Behind them, Tobias rose slowly from the dust, hatred twisting his face. "You don't get to take her from me, Cain," he hissed. "She's mine." Elias stood, blood soaking through his sleeve. "She ain't yours, Tobias. Never was. You just bought her fear. I gave her freedom." Tobias aimed again, but Clara stepped between them. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking but strong. "You've taken enough." He sneered. "Move aside, girl." She didn't. And in that single heartbeat, the wind shifted, Elias raised his revolver and fired. The shot hit Tobias square in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the dust. His gun fell from his hand, clattering uselessly against the stone. Elias walked over, boots crunching the dirt, eyes burning with fury and grief. "Go back to whatever hell you came from," he said softly. "Because if I ever see your shadow again near her, I'll bury it." Tobias groaned, clutching his wound. "You think this is over?" Elias stared down at him, his face hard as stone, voice low and final. "It ends when I say it does." He turned, took Clara's trembling hand, and led her away. The storm began again, soft rain falling from a sky that finally seemed to break open. As they walked, Clara looked back one last time, the canyon fading behind them, Tobias's figure small and defeated. They rode for hours, neither speaking. The only sound was the soft rhythm of hooves and rain. When they finally stopped, Elias dismounted and helped her down. "You shouldn't have stepped in front of him," he said quietly. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "And you shouldn't have taken a bullet for me." He smiled. "Guess we're both fools." Her hand brushed his cheek, gentle as the rain. "Then let's be fools together." And before he could answer, she kissed him. Soft, trembling, real. The kind of kiss that carries a promise no storm could wash away. Elias's hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer as the world around them disappeared. He tasted salt and rain and the wild sweetness of the woman he'd risked everything for. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, "What now?" He looked toward the horizon, the wide, endless stretch of wild land before them, and said, "Now we build something new. You and me." But peace in the West never lasted long. That night, as they sheltered in an abandoned barn miles from the canyon, Elias stared into the dying embers of a fire. Clara slept beside him, her head resting on his chest. And in the soft hush of the night, he remembered a name, a face from the past, a debt that still wasn't paid. He whispered it like a prayer, like a warning. Tobias Ward ain't the only devil still breathin'. The morning came slowly, rolling over the plains in pale gold light. The barn creaked softly with the wind, dust motes swirling through the beams of sun that slipped between old boards. The world outside was still wet from the storm, puddles gleaming like mirrors, horses grazing quietly near the fence. Inside, Elias stirred awake before Clara did. Her head was still on his chest, the rhythm of her breathing calm and even. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just watched her, strands of hair across her face, her lips parted in sleep, her hand resting over his heart as though keeping it steady. He'd been a man of dust and silence for years. A gun, a horse, a long trail behind him. But now, with her beside him, even the ache in his bones felt like a kind of grace. She shifted slightly and murmured, "You're thinking again." He smiled faintly. "Can't help it." Her eyes fluttered open, blue like a clear morning sky after rain. Was it about him? Elias didn't answer right away. He sat up slowly, the wooden floor creaking under him, and reached for his hat. Tobias'll crawl off and lick his wounds. Men like him don't die easy. But there's something worse still breathin'. Clara frowned, sitting up beside him, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Worse? He nodded. A man named Samuel Pike. Used to ride with me before I left life behind. We were bounty men. Rough kind. He's the one who taught Tobias everything he knows. He looked out toward the horizon. And he's the reason my brother's grave lies empty. Clara's voice softened. Empty. Elias turned the brim of his hat in his hands. Pike killed him, years ago. Took everything I was. I thought I buried that rage. But seeing Tobias yesterday, it woke something I thought was gone. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. You don't have to carry that alone anymore. He looked at her, the soft courage in her eyes, and something inside him eased. Maybe he didn't need revenge. Maybe he just needed peace. By midday, they reached a small trading post, the kind that sat halfway between nowhere and forgotten. Elias traded a few coins for supplies, a clean shirt, and feed for the horses. Clara found a corner near the fire and warmed her hands. The keeper, an old man with a beard like tangled rope, eyed them both. You two comin' from the east? Heard some trouble that way. Elias nodded once. We passed through it. The old man's eyes narrowed. Ain't talkin' about the storm, son. Talkin' about a bounty hunter ridin' through, a skin, questions. Said he's lookin' for a man named Cain. Elias froze. Clara saw the change in him, a small, sharp stillness. Did he leave a name? Elias asked quietly. The old man spat into the fire. Said he was Pike. Clara's hand found Elias's instantly. He squeezed it gently. Thank you, sir. They left before the old man could ask another question. By the time they reached the ridge overlooking the low valley, dusk had already settled like smoke over the land. The air smelled of sage and distant rain. Elias stopped the horses, scanning the horizon. He's close. Clara looked at him, fear flickering across her face. Then let's ride the other way. He shook his head slowly. If I run, he'll find us again. And next time, he'll bring others. She swallowed. Then, let me stay with you. He smiled faintly, touched her cheek. You got the kind of heart that'd scare the devil himself. She blinked back tears. You promise me something, Elias Cain. No matter what happens, you come back to me. He held her gaze. I promise. They found Pike by the river, a tall man in a black duster coat, leaning against a dead tree, hat pulled low. The air was heavy with the smell of gun oil and wet earth. I knew you'd come, Pike said, not looking up. You always were predictable, Cain. Elias dismounted slowly, his revolver still holstered. And you always were a coward. Pike laughed, low and rough. Coward? I gave you everything you are. I made you. And now you're gonna die trying to be better. Elias's voice dropped. Maybe. But at least I ain't you. They stood there, two ghosts of the same past, one seeking peace, the other drowning in pride. The river whispered behind them, the sky bruised purple and gold. Then, in one heartbeat, both drew. The gunfire cracked like lightning. Dust jumped. Birds scattered into the dying light. Pike's shot went wide, Elias's did not. The bullet caught Pike high in the chest. He staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief, blood blooming through his coat like a dark flower. Elias stepped closer, revolver steady. You should have stayed buried. Pike gasped, a cruel smile still twisting his mouth. You think killin' me makes you clean? Elias's eyes were cold and tired. No. But it keeps her safe. Pike fell, the sound of him hitting the dirt echoing long after the wind died. When Elias turned, Clara was there, tears streaking her face, the setting sun framing her like an angel in firelight. She ran to him, clutching his shirt, trembling. "You promised," she whispered. "You promised you'd come back." He exhaled, shaking. "And I did." She touched his cheek. "It's over now." He looked out at the horizon, the first stars breaking through the twilight. "Yeah. I reckon it is." They stood together as the world turned gold and quiet again. No more thunder, no more blood. Just the sound of water, the smell of rain, and the weight of something sacred, a future. Weeks passed. The cabin Elias had once built in the shadow of the hills was no longer a refuge of pain. It became their home, white curtains in the windows, a porch swing that creaked when the wind blew, and horses that grazed under the wide, forgiving sky. Clara tended the garden, her straw hat tilted low, a quiet smile always lingering. Elias fixed the fences, his scars slowly fading with the seasons. Sometimes, when the sun went down, she'd find him sitting outside, staring at the sky. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask. He'd smile softly. "About how lucky a man can get when he stops running." She'd laugh, that sweet, unguarded sound, and sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. And as the night fell over the plains, they'd watch the stars in silence, knowing that the West had taken much from them, but had given back something greater. Years later, the locals would still talk about the cowboy and the girl with the straw hat. Some said he saved her from a storm, others that she saved him from himself. But in truth, they'd saved each other. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered across the open range, you could still almost hear his voice. "Darlin', you ain't looked in my eyes yet." And somewhere in the endless horizon, love rode on, wild, tender, and eternal.